Hello, hello, everyone. Hi. End of the day, second day. I know there's still 1.5 more days in this conference, so I still expect the energy levels to be high. And if they're not high enough, hopefully I'm going to help you get them a little higher.
Yeah, we're going to require you to do push-ups.
No. I will not do push-ups, I will tell you that. Thank you all for joining us today. Really happy to have everyone here. Welcome to Halifax, for those who are coming from other cities. Welcome to Jipuktuk, the unceded and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We're so excited to have you with us. My name is Hussam Alokta. I'm the managing principal at Happy Cities, and I'm here with my colleague, Tristan Cleveland. And today we're going to share with you an idea that we've been working on for a few years. It's still in its infancy, so we are stress testing it with you all. But first, before jumping into what exactly we're going to talk about and everything we're going to do, let me start with a little story. This is Surrey, a municipality in BC that's not too far away from Vancouver. A cool thing happened in Surrey. Surrey didn't used to have much of a downtown. This is what you got, really. A lot of cheap strip malls on big roads, no places to walk, no places to sit, no reason really to be there on foot. But recently, Surrey turned this into this. This beautiful new city hall, a new public library, pedestrian-friendly sidewalks, good transit, which attracted more pedestrians, more commercial that is focused on pedestrians, just generally mixed-use development, more housing, which is amazing. But there is a problem with the story. This transformation took 50 years. The first plan they came up with it was in 1977, which faced a series of obstacles. First, it was killed altogether because the engineering department just said, you can't add this many housing without widening all the roads, which was a non-starter. They took years to rewrite this plan. They wrote new zoning that would allow the mixed-use growth. Lots of conversations around with TransLink around the SkyTrain, and when finally got a SkyTrain, that was a big thing for them. But that also took years. But then after all of these things came together, they were like, okay, let's see the growth, and then nothing happened. After all of that, developers still didn't want to build the type of mixed-use walkable density that they expected to see in Surrey. And they were skeptical of the whole thing, you know? If this is what it looks like now, how can a developer justify investing into a higher value, more expensive walkable growth in a place where seemingly no one walks? So in the late 2000s, they used a bunch of strategies to try and get this moving. They wrote new pedestrian-friendly street design guides to try and make the streets a bit safer. And when they thought about their investments here, you look at this is a lot of public investment. But when they decided they're going to build a new city hall, they put it on this block. When they decided they're going to do a public library, they put it on this block. When this block happened to be close to the campus for a nearby university, and that was all near the transit station. When they were allowing new housing, they allowed it near that block. They focused their efforts not on just spreading development all over, but on getting one great block built. And now, 50 years later, it's starting to feel like a downtown in places, right? There's still a lot of improvements that can happen, but the transformation from the first picture to this is quite amazing. And there's lots to learn here, but the one thing that stands out to me was like, man, that was so hard. That was so hard, wasn't it? Like, we talk about walkable transformations in these conferences like this, like we are on this hero's journey. You know, the planners that are fighting all of the standards and the laws and the council, and we're doing all of this effort to build something like this, and it is always hard. I put an AI urban planner hero looking over a city. And for some reason it came out as an old man with a cane, it looks like a gun holster, and a third arm coming out of his chest. I think it's to handle all of the development applications. So I don't think we're going to lose our jobs to AI yet. But it always made us think, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to do this? Because this is not that hard, right? This is easy. Easier. And when you look at the kind of new homes that were built in communities in the last couple of decades, recent research showed that between 2006 and 2016, 73% of new homes were built in car-dependent communities. In communities where you can't walk to places, we are totally reliant on cars, you can't access good transit, can't buy a carton of milk with a short walk. And that's a problem, because walkability and car dependency, the opposite of it, are probably some of the most heavily researched concepts in urban planning. We know that there is mountains of evidence that car dependence is bad for our health, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for social relationships, the climate, heart disease, cancer, most of the top 10 killers of Canadians today are exacerbated by living in car-dependent communities. So, if you think about this from the inverse perspective, like if there's a doctor that is prescribing something to their patients that has been shown to not work, to make their lives worse, there would be stronger conversations on this, right? But this is still what most often gets built, because this is easy and this is hard. So that's where our kind of, call it research or just conversation started, is thinking about walkability from the other perspective. Tim Ferriss, the self-help guru, he kind of in his podcast, one of the questions he asks a lot is, what would this look like if it was easy? What would walkability look like if the process of building it was easy? Was easier than building car dependence? And how can we change the system to make it easier to build what we know is better for health, for well-being, for the climate, as opposed to car dependency? Before I dive into that, before we explain what our idea is, tell you a little bit about ourselves. We are Happy Cities. Our organization was started when our founder, Charles Montgomery, wrote a book called Happy City that looked at the relationship between urban design and well-being. And over the years, we have looked, taken an interdisciplinary approach to look at, public health, psychology, neuroscience, behavioral economics, sociology, and all of these things to try and get an understanding of how the built environment affects our well-being, our social relationships, our health, and all the things that matter to us. And today we translate that into action to create the type of mixed-use, missing middle type communities that are walkable, and we try and find ways to change the system there. This is from a project that we're working on here in Halifax, in Eastern Passage. It's going to council next week. So, also my colleague Tristan, who I'm going to hand over the mic to, has been studying this phenomenon that we've just been talking about, is how can you transform car-dependent areas into walkable areas, and how that's happened all over Canada. And he's interviewed dozens of experts and politicians and planners all over. And he just got his PhD last month, Dr. Tristan Cleveland, to give him a shot. I'm going to pass it over to Tristan to take you over to the next area. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. That was excellent. Game time. Which of these are easier to build in your city? The bike lane that directs bikes directly into the door zone where they're likely to be hit by cars, or the protected bike lane that meets all the standards for all ages and abilities? And not what can you build in theory in your downtown, but in general in the city, which is easier to build? Show of hands, this one? Or that one? So this is upside down and backwards. How about, is it easier to build the 2-lane slip lane that directs cars at high speed directly into pedestrians, or the raised crosswalk? This one? Or the raised crosswalk? Boy, that's a bummer. Is it easier to build density in the majority of your city that has dead zones around it and blank walls at the bottom, or density that's lined at the bottom with people-friendly streetscapes? This one? Show of hands? Or that one? Very good. I'm very encouraged to see some hands on the second one. Let's get more hands in the future. So, I mean, it's right now we're living in bizarro world. Everything that we know we need to be doing is basically against the law. We can't build this community right here, even though we know this is exactly what people love, because the lanes are too thin, there's not enough setbacks between buildings, not enough parking, etc., etc. So how did it get like this? And if we understand how it gets like this, we can start to use that as a solution to fix it, right? So I'm going to go back in time really quick. 1880s was the decade that transformed cities forever. We invented the car in that decade. We also invented the electric streetcar and bicycles and elevators and steel beams for construction. So fascinatingly though, in the first few decades after that, cities did not become car dependent. The first thing that happened was they actually became way more walkable. Cities started being built around transit. We started getting higher density than we ever had before. We had most transit systems were very profitable, such as here in Toronto, because in the suburbs, buildings were built to like 6 stories around tram lines. And in downtown, they were higher density than they ever were before. Car companies hated this because, as described in Peter Norton's book, Fighting Traffic, in the 1920s, they stopped selling as many cars because there literally was no space for them in cities. So to fix this, they attacked the system. They didn't do local battles like we are doing, trying to fix problems every single community one at a time. Instead, they did ingenious stuff, like they funded an institute at Harvard, the Erskine Bureau of Street Traffic Research, which educated the first generation of traffic engineers and established such glorious little principles like the only response to congestion is to widen roads. That came from here. Or the idea that streets are fundamentally for moving cars. They also worked with politicians to make civil engineers in charge of designing streets, because civil engineers were incentivized to build big projects because they were the ones paid to build them, right? So in Canada, one of these groups was called the Canadian Goods Road Association. They were so focused on highways that the highway cloverleaf was literally in their logo. And they developed the first standards in Canada on highways, and they did a really good job. They made highways much safer with wider lanes and clear zones and slower turn or like wide turns. But then they unilaterally decided that their standards also apply to the center of our communities. And they renamed themselves the Transportation Association of Canada. And that is why so many of our inner city streets feel like highways, because those standards were literally developed for highways. And planners, of course, we were just as bad. We established model zoning codes and worked with CMHC to strong-arm developers, forcing them to build single-family housing, in many cases explicitly to exclude Black people and other communities from the communities where white people wanted to live. So it was baked in racism and explicit strategy to create car dependency at a large scale across the country, and that's what we have today. So to fix this, we need to respond at a similar systemic level. We can't be just doing this battle one at a time in every single community. That's why we are proposing to create a national walkability designation. To understand what this is, imagine all these communities across the country that have been developing their own mixed-use, dense, walkable zones. Imagine if these communities had the power to draw a line around these zones and create a force field, protecting these areas from these car-oriented standards that should not apply there, and creating as many other policies and standards to make it as easy as possible for all of these communities anywhere in the country to create walkable places, anything we can think of, to make it as easy as possible. Not imposing anything, not replacing local policies, but rather replacing the provincial and national standards that would get in the way of these communities doing the kind of walkable zoning they want to do. So we're not proposing anything more radical than the idea that the rules and skills you need to design communities that feel like this is different from that. right? Like the people who are really good at this aren't the people who are really good at that. So we need different certification, different professional groups focused on walkability. This is no more crazy than saying that motorcycles require different skills and experts than airplanes, right? We need people specialized in healthy, good community design. We're not suggesting that walkability should apply everywhere. Walkability is appropriate in, of course, mixed-use neighborhoods, downtown, suburban, rural, and urban town centers, transit-oriented developments. Machine-centered design is appropriate in big box areas, highways, industrial parks, ports and airports, car-dependent neighborhoods. And this is important because we feel that a lot of previous reform efforts failed because they tried to take on existing standards head on and try to change everything everywhere, right? But there's too much entrenched interests and institutional path dependence for car-oriented areas. And the fact is, a highway in an industrial park shouldn't be walkable, right? So we're suggesting that we carve out a different area where a different set of expertise and standards apply. This distinction corresponds roughly with what strong towns have been pointing out recently. Many of you might be familiar with the distinction between streets, where really the goal is to create a place, a strong local economy, slow traffic, walking short blocks, etc. And roads, where the goal is to not create a place, but to enable fast transportation to distant places, right? And they point out that the worst thing you can do is try to combine the two, because then you get a strode, which are places, the most dangerous streets, because they combine high-speed traffic with many pedestrians trying to cross the street, and they actually function very poorly both for cars and for all other modes. So our proposal is to try to eliminate these hybrids by clarifying where walkability applies. That's where you build streets, and you try to do that to a standard of excellence. And then outside of walkable areas, you build your highways and industrial parks for cars, right? And you do both well, and you stop trying to mix them for these perverse amalgams. Again, we do not want to make a one-size-fit-all approach where you force every community to do the same. We think about it like apple trees. Every apple tree is unique. Every apple tree requires its own care. But also, every apple tree requires soil and nutrients and water. In the same way, all walkable communities require certain things. They should all have safe people priority streets. They should have transit and cycling infrastructure, definitely small blocks. And we need to work with developers with incentives and regulations to achieve mixed use density with human-friendly design. Like, these are the basics, right? We all know this. We've been studying this for decades, so this should just be normal now. This is my hero journey slide. Just like we've gotten used to the idea that this should be hard. Like we celebrate the idea that like each success, like we had to battle the engineering department. But when we treat it like a challenge that should be hard, we leave a lot of communities behind. So this is a community in Halifax, Spryfield. Everyone wants to transform this street. The local business association is asking for mixed-use dense zoning here. The residents associations are asking for it. The councilors asking for it. The planners absolutely love the idea. And they are still stuck with zoning from 1978. And it's going to be many years still until they get their updated plan. What are we doing? Why is this so hard? And even when we implement the new walkable areas, there's so many compromises, right? So this is a new suburban main street in Oakville, Ontario, in the uptown core. And the engineering department insisted that the main street act as a highway bypass, which means that instead of being 2 lanes, they made it 5 lanes. We make so many mistakes. So many mistakes, one after the other. It'd be like it was very hard to build proper airplanes and 73% of them crashed and blew up, right? If that was happening, we would have a direct systemic response. But that's actually what's happening to our communities. People are, it's the leading cause of death in Canada is car dependency right now. If you look at the number of other diseases it causes, we can't allow this to keep happening this way. And for us, none of us got into planning to process variances for Walmarts and strip malls, right? But that's what a lot of us are stuck doing. And if you go to the Urban Planning Forum on Reddit, it just is post after post about people complaining like, ugh, like I'm not being able to work on anything I learned about in school. All I'm doing is like processing these like rules that I hate. So here's the proposal. We have successfully convinced cities over the last 50 years that walkability is a good idea. They're convinced. There's cities across the continent trying to make this happen because they understand how valuable it is. Let's empower them to empower us to do the kind of planning we want to do. So here's how it would work. This is the minimum viable product, just the DNA, the core points. Created by, so the National Walkability Designation, created by professional organizations, CIP, and hopefully Transportation Association of Canada and maybe Architecture Association. Local governments choose whether to apply it and where it applies, so this is not being forced by anybody. It's just we make it available. Keep it as a national GIS database. And professional organizations, provinces, and federal government, and anybody else can create policies, guidelines, standards, etc. for it. Basically, the idea is once the bucket exists, we can start to add stuff to it. So the designation could start off very simple, but over time we can create more standards or more tools to make it easier and easier for communities to create walkable communities across the country. One note of clarification. Often people get to thinking that we're talking about like a reward for communities that have achieved walkability or LEED certification, that kind of thing. It's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about allowing communities to turn this into a walkable place and protecting existing walkable communities from that kind of mistake, from having a road go through your community without a crosswalk. So, questions. And at this stage, our goal is to ask if anyone has questions clarifying the concept, because we are about to have a discussion about how this should work, what we could put in that designation, whether there are problems in the concept. So at the moment, we're just inviting questions about that would help. If you have any burning questions about like what the concept is, if we weren't clear enough on something.